BattleBit Remastered has a lot of different vehicles you can use, and they all have their different purposes. So I'm here to break down today when you should use what vehicle and how to use them a little bit more effectively in-game. Hopefully this will help improve your gameplay and get you a few more kills in-game. So first things first, I want to break down each different type of vehicle in the game. You've got your transport vehicles, armed and unarmed. You've got tanks. You've got naval vehicles. You've got light armored vehicles. And you've got helicopters. First, we're going to start working our way down the list. Transports are meant to just bring people into battle, and whether they're armed or not kind of depends on the type of vehicle you're using. Tanks are heavily armored and are meant to take a lot of hits and deal a lot of damage. Naval vehicles are essentially transports, but for the water, which kind of makes sense, because boat. Light armor vehicles are also meant to transport people to the battle, but they have much heavier armaments on them, and are meant to not exactly be able to deal with tanks, but be able to deal with any vehicle short of a tank. And helicopters are mostly meant to transport, but some of them do have guns to help take out other vehicles as well as infantry. Alright, now there's a few things I want to talk about that applies to every vehicle here. So if you didn't know, actually, every vehicle can be resupplied and repaired back at the base it came from. So you'll notice that every vehicle has an ammo count for the ones that do have guns. These can be resupplied at the main base, and also if you go to the main base, you'll see it says repairing here. Something else I want to talk about for every vehicle. I suggest if you're driving or piloting any vehicle, you drive as the engineer class. This gives you the repair tool. If you have the repair tool, you can hop out real easily to make repairs when you're damaged. Alright, let's get right into breaking down our first vehicles, the transports. So these are lightly armored vehicles that are meant mostly just to bring people around the battlefield and not take a lot of hits and not do a lot of damage. Some of them are armed with a machine gun on them that is really only effective against other lightly armored vehicles or infantry. In this case, I suggest using this more on the edges of the battlefield and not driving straight through. If you drive straight through, you're probably going to get blown up by someone with an RPG pretty quickly. A real specific one here, the quad bike. I don't have any really good tactics for this because it's just a speedy zoom boy little guy and you just kind of zip around the battlefield. You can get shot pretty easily, but it's a lot of fun to use. So the next vehicle I want to talk about is the light armored vehicles, or the real world these are better known as APCs, Armored Personnel Carriers. Their purpose is pretty similar to the transport, but they have a lot heavier armor and a lot better armament than the transports. So these are still meant to bring people around the battlefield, but they can certainly hold their own in a fight. The 30mm cannon on them can do quite a number to buildings and other vehicles that are short of a tank. They will do damage to a tank, but very little. So how I suggest using these is actually to drive up close to where the fight's going on. If there's anyone in them, drop them off. And then kind of sit there and see where you can get a line of fire on where the fighting's going on. Maybe you can help take out some snipers that are on top of buildings and stuff. These do a number on buildings, so if there's cover too, you can help take out cover that's being used. If someone calls out that they're hiding in a building, just use this to start removing the building. These can take a hit, but they can't take a lot of hits. If you take a hit from, say, an RPG, you'll live, but I suggest you start backing off to go fix the vehicle up a little bit. So, moving up on the list of how heavily armored things are, let's talk about the tanks. There's only two types of tanks in this game. You got the M1 Abrams and the T90. So both are meant to take a lot of hits and deal a lot of heavy damage. Each tank is loaded with an HE round and an AP round. HE round stands for high explosive and AP stands for armor piercing round. I suggest driving around with the HE round loaded, because more often than not you're going to be dealing with infantry and buildings, and if you happen to run another vehicle, it doesn't take too long to switch to the AP. So you're going to want to use this in a similar way to the light armored vehicles. You're not going to want to be right up on the front of the fighting, because if you get right up on the front, you're going to have people on your sides, and they're going to very easily hit you with RPGs and grenades and whatnot. You'll get taken out pretty quickly. If you set yourself back, say, maybe about 100 meters from the fight, and kind of get a good line of fire to take out buildings and infantry running around, you'll be a lot more effective. Now, both these tanks are armed with machine guns as well, so you don't need to be shooting main guns at infantry. You can just use the machine gun and it'll work just as effectively, and you can save those main gun rounds for taking out buildings and other vehicles. So next I want to talk about naval vehicles. These are pretty similar to transports on land, but I think they have one much better use to them. So they're real fast, and more often than not, I find myself in this game totally forgetting that water exists and that you can even move around on it. So these are a great stealth vehicle, actually, because they're pretty quiet too. So if you zip around back of the enemy on one of these, it's more likely than not you won't be spotted, and you can flank them real well and hopefully do some serious damage. Now, I've got two types of naval vehicles here. We've got the real light one that's pretty similar to the quad bike. What I said about the quad bike worked for this. It's fast, you go zoom. That's about it. I don't really have any good tips for it. Now, the other one can hold quite a few people and has a machine gun on it. This one's much more effective for zipping around behind the enemy, bringing a bunch of people with you. Okay, our last class of vehicles to talk about here is the helicopters. You get two types. You've got the lightly armored ones, and you've got the heavily armored transports. The lightly armored ones tend to be small attack helicopters. These are great for flying around the battlefield and trying to take out lightly armored vehicles, even tanks sometimes, as well as taking out infantry that are held up in buildings and whatnot. Now the transport helicopters are real fun, because they've got a minigun on the side, and the minigun is fun. But also because you can fly around the battlefield and bring people around real quickly. For these, the best way to use them depends on the type you're using. The light attack helicopters, I suggest staying more towards the edges of the battlefield and then kind of shooting into what you're trying to aim at. If you fly directly over, you're going to get hit real quick and taken down real fast. Now the heavy transport helicopters, you kind of need to go right into the center of the fight in order to drop people off. I'd suggest not going to the dead center of the fight so you get shot down really quick, but get a little closer, kind of try and find a nice spot to land, drop everyone off, and then I suggest you get out of there and go try to pick more people up. Alright, those are the basics about how to use vehicles in BattleBit. Hopefully you learned something today about how to drive around a little bit more effectively and have a little more fun in the game. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love if you could like down below, and consider subscribing to stay tuned for more BattleBit content.